I'm Nayan Chanda from the Yale Center for the Study of Globalization, and we are delighted to have in our studio back again Thomas Friedman, foreign affairs columnist of New York Times, and the author of the just published book. And Tom is going to talk to us about his book and also some of the issues that are urgent issues we face today. Tom, welcome back.
Great to be here, Nayan. Great to be here to talk about That Used to Be Us. And in fairness, I should say this is co-written with a Yale grad, my friend Johns Hopkins University Foreign Affairs Professor Michael Mandelbaum.
Yes. So Tom, the question that comes to my mind is that you are the foreign affairs columnist of New York Times. So what are you doing writing this book on America's domestic crisis?
Well, it's actually even more complicated. Now, I'm the foreign affairs columnist of the New York Times. My co-author is the chaired foreign policy professor at Johns Hopkins. What are two foreign policy guys doing writing a book about domestic American politics? And the answer is very simple. We're old friends. We're neighbors. We've had a conversation going for 20 years, almost daily, about the world. And we noticed something in recent years. We noticed that we start every day talking about the world and end up talking about America. Mm-hmm. And we concluded really that was because America, its fate, future, vigor, and vitality, was actually the biggest foreign policy issue in the world. Because we do believe America, we make mistakes in the world, we do some dumb things, but on balance, we think we do a lot more good things. And that we are a net provider of a huge amount of global public goods. Whether it's keeping the sea lanes open in Europe or promoting free trade or, spending money to deal with AIDS in Africa. We firmly believe we are a net plus to the world. In fact, we'd even go farther. We are the key provider of global public goods. We are, in a sense, the tent pole that holds up the world. And if that tent pole buckles or frays, your kids won't just grow up in a different America. They will grow up in a different world. Because when America went into decline because when Britain went into decline in the 20th century, America was right there to pick up that global stabilizing role. If we go into decline, who is there to pick up that role?
Yeah, so I think this book is essentially you are analyzing why America has gone into decline.
Yes.
And especially I'm very interested in this book, especially coming after your last bestseller, The World is Flat. Because the world is flat and is getting flatter,
yes,
the U.S. is now facing the challenge that it itself created. That globalization this modern globalization was created by the United States, and now it is feeling a victim of the same globalization. How did it happen?
Well, no question. We face two challenges, Nayan. One is relative decline. That's inevitable. And our friend Fareed Zakaria wrote about that. The rise of the rest. The rise of the rest was inevitable with globalization and the end of the Cold War. What we want to avoid is absolute decline, where the others aren't just rising, but we are meeting them and falling behind them. I think we're a ways from that, but that is a real possibility. And that's really what we really try to explore in the book. We believe America made the biggest mistake a country or species can make. We misread our environment. We misread our environment at the end of the Cold War. We thought the Cold War was a victory, and surely it was, in every sense of the term, but it was also the onset of the biggest challenge we'd ever faced. We just unleashed 2 billion people just like us. And then we provided the technology.
What you mean is that China, India,
Brazil,
Eastern Europe.
And Eastern Europe, all this pent-up emotion, all this pent-up energy, and then we wired the world so they could compete, connect, and collaborate with us so much better and so much more efficiently. By the way, this is a huge net plus for the world, I believe. But nonetheless, it did provide us with challenges that we really weren't ready for, because we won the war, so we put our feet up just when we needed to be retying our shoes. Then we compounded it after 9/11 by spending the next decade chasing the losers from globalization, called the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, rather than the winners, called India and China. So we spent all this time thinking about and planning about how to chase the losers rather than thinking about and planning how to really compete with the winners. And you put those two together, and it explains a lot about why we are where we are.
Because the American deficit, which is now killing the U.S., is partly the result of that war on terrorism.
Exactly. It was a huge diversion of assets and a huge diversion of attention. Now, we can debate, and historians will. Some of that was just inevitable. We were attacked. It was not like these people were innocent and that it didn't require some reaction. The question is, did we overreact, or did we overpay for what we achieved? And we would conclude, sadly, that we did. That whatever happens in Afghanistan and Iraq, we overpaid for it. Let's hope we overpaid for something decent and transformational. In Iraq, I think there's still a chance for that. In Afghanistan, I'm very dubious. But whatever it is, we overpaid for it.
Now, the U.S. invented microchip.
Right.
The U.S. invented internet. And now, this internet and microchip seems to be posing a biggest threat to the U.S. industrial hegemony.
Well, they do and they don't. Of course, we not only invented the microchip and the internet, we invented social networking. And all the great social networking sites, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. And so this is actually the next stage in the revolution. The problem with these new industries, these industries based on bits and bytes, is they generate enormous returns, but very little employment. Do you know that you could take all the employees from Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter and fit them into Madison Square Garden and still have room for your family?
And they're worth
and they're worth multiple hundred billion. I mean, so they create huge returns for their investors and founders, but they don't create a lot of direct employment. Now, at the same time, Facebook is creating opportunities for people who want to become entrepreneurs, to become entrepreneurial globally, to share your ideas, to collaborate with others, to find markets and partners and investors like never before. So these are enormously powerful tools. And we are in the middle of a whole new phase of the IT revolution. It's the combination of social, these social networking sites, mobile, wireless-enabled smartphones that can get you right onto the web, and then mobile, social, and what is the last one? It's the cloud. So when you're mobile, social, in the cloud, and suddenly in this cloud, you can actually get access to all the computing power Google has.
The cloud is the server capacity that is made available.
It's these servers that store all these applications. But now you, Nayan, can have access to literally the same computing power that Google has. You can rent it by an hour. Do you realize what a factory that puts up in the air for anyone to access? So the problem is when we're in one of these transitions, and it's very hard for people to see. People can only see the job they had or the job they need. And that's totally understandable. But in fact, a whole new world a parallel universe is borning there.
The kind of jobs that have been created was never known about.
And we're just seeing them.
And now we have 4.6 billion people on cell phone. That
so
creates.
And you realize what that means. That means that in a decade we'll have universal connectivity. That you will be able to say that everyone on the planet has a cell phone. And when that happens, it's just going to be mind-blowing.
Because the cell phones are creating a lot of business models.
In India, as you know, all kinds of business models being done off the cell phone. Now, people will use it for ill, we know. But think of the problems we're going to be able to solve. I mean, all of us are smarter than one of us. So imagine all of us we're going to be able to leverage to solve all that brain power that wasn't available is now going to be available. I find that tremendously exciting.
But the question of brain power brings me back to the point that you made in your book. You said that Tsinghua University and Beijing University are the biggest supplier of PhD to the United States. Now, why is it happening? Why is the U.S. falling behind in this area of technology?
There's a macro answer to your question. And the macro answer is that we had a formula for success in this country. We didn't become the world's richest country by accident. We actually became the world's richest country because we had, don't let anybody know I said this, we had an industrial policy. There, I said it. We didn't call it industrial policy, but it was a 5-part formula for success. Educate our people up to and beyond whatever the technology is, whether it's the cotton gin or the supercomputer. So first we had universal primary education for an agricultural economy, then universal secondary for a factory-based economy, and finally the world's best post-secondary system for a knowledge economy. So that was our first pillar of success. Second, we had the world's best infrastructure. roads, airports, telecom. Third, we had the world's most open immigration policy. So we attracted all the most energetic and talented immigrants, what we call high IQ risk takers, to come to our shores and start 30% to 40% of the new companies in Silicon Valley every year, as we know.
And got you tons of Nobel Prize.
Exactly. Fourth, we had the world's best laws for incentivizing risk-taking and preventing recklessness. And last, we had the most government-funded research to push out the boundaries of science and technology and physics and math and biology. So our venture capitalists could pluck the best flowers and start great new companies that both were entrepreneurial and help people. So that was our 5-part formula for success. Well, let's look at all 5 today. Now, education, by any global comparison test of 15-year-olds, we're in the middle of the pack. We're around there with Slovenia and Argentina. Infrastructure, Nayan and I just flew from Hong Kong, where we first met, to LAX, Los Angeles Airport. That's like flying from the Jetsons to the Flintstones today. Okay, really, when you compare the infrastructure. Yeah. Third, immigration policy. Well, we have Republican debates, basically, where the Republicans are outbidding each other on who can fry more people who can electrocute more people who are trying to get into our country from across the Mexican border. Now, we're not advocates of illegal immigration, but our mind should be really focused on how do we get more people here legally who want to come here. Rules for capital investing. How'd you like that subprime crisis? Mm-hmm. And lastly, government-funded research. Beep, looks like that. So if you actually say, well, how did we get here? And what are we doing with how we got here? It's a terrible story. We've taken our formula and we've put it all into decline.
Yeah, I think in your book you have very interesting statistics. You've said that U.S. consumers spent $7.1 billion in eating potato chips.
Yes.
And the federal government spends $5.1 billion on energy research.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
These two numbers actually tell two stories. One is the obesity epidemic that is hitting the United States.
Yeah.
And secondly, the price of oil and the havoc it is causing on the U.S. economy.
Yeah. No question. There's all kinds of weird anomalies like that. I think California now spends more on prisons and on education. We're into just a whole series of bad choices. What happens, Nayan, is when a country or society makes a lot of bad choices over a long period of time, that's how a great country goes into decline. Mm-hmm. And we too much resemble today the high school football coach who always wants to tell you about that touchdown he threw 30 years ago. God, I was there and I threw that touchdown and it was Friday night, but I want to hear about the touchdowns we're throwing now, and we're not throwing enough.
Mm-hmm. And so this sense that America is number one and still number one, and in real life people are realizing that's not the case. So this dissonance between the perception of America being number one and the reality of what you describe so vividly in your book about the shoddy infrastructure, falling education, and falling health. This is creating anger in the public. And that perhaps explains some of the phenomena like Tea Party or Occupy Wall Street that we have seen.
I think it's creating two things. One is anger or anxiety, and you see it in the Republican debates. They're so aggressive. It's against whether it's against gay and lesbian, couples, or whether it's against illegal immigrants. There's a harshness. There's an exclusiveness, and what it is, it's scarcity thinking. Mm-hmm. It's not abundance thinking. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's really what it is. It's scarcity thinking. And that, I think, is one problem. And the other problem, though, in fairness, is that our economy became so financialized, so dependent on Wall Street. And Wall Street, turned out to be really off on its own quasi-criminal jag, where it got into the habit of what Jagdish Bhagwati, the Columbia economist, calls not financing creative destruction, the founding of new industries and the replacing of old, but really got in the habit of financing destructive creation. I mean, literally financial bets and instruments using your savings and mine that had no more social utility than betting on, as they say in Guys and Dolls, whether Lindy's sells more cheesecake than strudel. That's what a lot of these people were doing. In fact, there was a very important case that was settled last week that had Gaddafi not died, I think would have been really front page news. And that was Citibank agreed to pay a fine of $280 million to the SEC. Now, this is a very important case because what Citibank was guilty of, although they admitted no guilt, but they paid the fine, was actually going out, assembling a package of the most toxic mortgages they could find, selling them to customers with one hand, and then shorting them with another. Now, Goldman Sachs did a similar thing, but they did it on behalf of a client who came and said, this is what I want to do. Citibank did this for its own account, okay? That's as low as you get. And my savings account is at Citibank. So I take this kind of personally.
Yeah.
You did that with my savings, you know, basically. And what's really scary now when you think about it, I don't want to dwell on this, but that there was a meeting one day at Citibank. And somebody said, I have an idea. Let's assemble the biggest pile of toxic mortgages about to default we can find. Let's sell them to some of our best clients. And then on the other side of the floor, let's short them so we make money coming and going. And you know what, Nayan? This meeting happened and nobody stood up and said, excuse me. That is both illegal, immoral, unethical, and completely beneath our global brand. Nobody stood up and said that. This is a very important story.
Yeah, because this is violating not only the law, the social contract with the country.
Exactly. And that's what Wall Street's about.
Yeah.
They're saying, what is wrong with you people? And here you have to ask, what is wrong with the Republican Party? Because rather than saying, let's have a serious Dodd-Frank financial reform, they're basically defending banks who now want to keep regulation at a minimum. I mean, you know, House Majority Leader Cantor called them a mob, the people on Wall Street. Well, if they're a mob, what would you call those people at Citibank? They're another kind of mob, okay? Gangster mob. I mean, that's how they, this is exactly the kind of behavior you'd expect from the mafia. It's like a numbers racket.
Yeah. So, Tom, if we could switch to a bit to the
Please.
foreign affairs, your bit.
Please, yeah.
President Obama has now announced a complete pullout of American troops from Iraq. How do you see that? There's some people are saying that this is pretty dangerous because it is going to be exposing Iraq to the possible Iranian influence and all the problems that would follow.
You know what I say, Nayan? I'm with President Obama on this one because, by the way, part of me very much sympathizes with the Iraqis. They want their country back, and they want. They don't want Americans stomping around their country and having basically diplomatic immunity. I mean, I kind of get that, you know.
Because that was the condition on which the talks failed.
That's why they failed. But I can understand from their side, you know, we've committed a lot of good things, a lot of abuses as well. And you know, every Iraqi has a story of being caught in a traffic jam or, you know, Americans overstepping their lines and whatnot. And yet we've obviously done a lot of good things there and invested as well. But so I understand Iraqis saying, okay, we want our country back, and I'm not going to go to the parliament and vote, you know, to give Americans immunity. At the same time, Nayan, Iraqis, it's now 2003, we're in 2011, heading for shortly 2012. They need to get their act together. And that is they need to sit down, look each other in the eye, and say, we're going to bury the Shiite-Sunni thing. We're going to find a way to live together and write a social contract without always needing a referee. Why do they want us there? Because when you strip it all away, it's because they don't trust their ability to live alone together. And at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, you're never going to get there until, we go and you get there. And so I think it is a risky thing. I understand why they want us to go.
Taking off the third wheel.
But exactly, it's taking off the training wheels. And time now to do that. And because we became an escape valve for them. We became the valve that some could blame and others could hide behind. Now people say it's a huge victory for Iran. I disagree. I totally disagree. Because I think for Iran, they're not going to have us as this lightning rod that everyone in Iraq could focus on. And once we go, who is the imperial power in the region? It's Iran. And Iran and Iraq fought an 8-year war. Now, let's remember that. And that was not contrived, okay? It wasn't just about Saddam. I have 1,000 years of history that says to me that Arabs and Persians don't play well together. And so I think this gets very complicated for Iran.
Now, talking about Obama's decision on Iraq, basically, you were telling me earlier that Obama is basically ending the foreign policy of Bush well.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it's ironic that Obama has proven himself very deft at finishing and completing George Bush's war on terrorism much better than Bush, because he's approached it in a very, I think, smart, tough way. He's leveraged our global intelligence assets and our allies, used drones to engage in targeted killings of known terrorists who we could not get any other way. Bin Laden, that wasn't a drone, that was a ground attack, but al-Awlaki in Yemen. And been risk averse, yet ready to take very calculated risks, but generally not getting us, as in Libya, overcommitted. So you could really say, ironically, Barack Obama has finished George Bush's war much better than George Bush. And the country is better off for it. At the same time, and I think this is what drives Republicans nuts, by the way, because who is this neighborhood organizer, used to hang out with a bunch of SDS people, and meanwhile he's doing it better than the tough guys. Score one for Obama. But at the same time, Obama's been pretty much a failure in his own foreign policy. If you look at Arab-Israel conflict, he completely made a mess out of that. The climate negotiations completely made a mess out of that. Pakistan, we're now in a war, been in a war of words with them. Afghanistan, he doubled down in a way I think was utterly reckless, starting in the transition. And so it's kind of interesting in his own foreign policy, he hasn't made much headway. And I think that has to do with the fact that what is diplomacy at its heart? It's making deals between states, signing treaties, resolving conflicts. And I think the reason we're much less successful, Obama's much less successful, previous administrations have been less successful. In fact, there's been no consequential Secretary of State since James Baker and the end of the Cold War, because the world is so much messier. All these states that were propped up by the Cold War are now rotting basically or collapsing. And Pakistan's a perfect example. And therefore there we just deal with the military even. And at the same time, we're much weaker. We don't have the resource, the leverage. Diplomacy is all about leverage. It's just like negotiating your baseball contract, basically, between you and some owner. Who's got the leverage on their side? If we want to have an effective diplomacy vis-a-vis Iran, we need to have an energy policy that takes away their leverage. If we want to have effective diplomacy vis-a-vis China, we need a savings policy and an education policy and an investment policy that takes away their leverage. Otherwise, we're just going around the world negotiating with everyone without leverage. Well, that's, negotiating with China or Iran without leverage, that's like playing baseball without a bat. Okay? I mean, you're really got no way to deal with the world. And I think that's why Obama's, targeted killing, police work we can do, but when diplomacy is conventional like this, it's much harder. So I say, Mama, don't let your kids grow up to be secretaries of state.
But before that, Tom, before finishing off,
please.
You say in your book that both Mike Mandelbaum and you are frustrated optimists. Now, how can you be optimist in the situation that you described?
Well, it's a good question, and the reason the book is called That Used to Be Us, that is, it has a backward-looking title but a forward-looking theme, is because we know we didn't get here by accident. We actually had this formula for success. So if we could do it before, why can't we do it again? We're not asking Americans to become like India or China or Brazil. We're asking them to become like themselves. And that's why the book concludes by saying the history books, we need to read are our own. The country we need to rediscover is America. That used to be us, and it can be again.
So you are still optimistic that America would come out of this spin? And
not only am I optimistic now, what's frustrating is that the solution is like you could almost touch it. It's right here. I mean, if we had a grand bargain right now where basically Republicans agreed to X amount of short-term stimulus to get the economy going again, and Democrats agreed to Simpson Bowles plan for basically taking nearly $4 trillion out of the budget, over the next decade or so. We not only would have the fiscal house in order to move forward, but we would unlock the pessimism. Right now, a lot of people here, I think in America, feel like we're all children of permanently divorcing parents. When you look at what's going on at the national political level, it's actually very depressing. it's not the kind of thing that really it makes you say, boy, I'd really like to invest a lot of money right now.
Yeah.
These people really know where they're going.
So it looks like the way the Republicans are determined to block any initiative by President Obama, which might give him credit.
Exactly.
Which means that this situation will continue until the elections.
Well, no, it's much worse. It'll continue after the election. Because all the election will be about is who can get 50.001% in order to take power and then have no mandate for the real changes we need. Yeah. My frustration with President Obama is not that I could totally understand the Republicans are trying to block him, everything he does. My frustration is, why are they getting away with it now? They're mugging him in plain sight. Are they getting away with it? Maybe because he hasn't actually given the American people a reason to stand up and stop the mugging. Maybe
is it a failure to communicate, you think?
I think partly a failure to communicate, partly a failure of substance. Because any Obama speech, I find I travel a lot. I think Americans totally get where we are. They know we have a real problem. And they know we need a real plan. But the speech that Obama has to give has to start out by saying, first and foremost, friends, this is going to hurt. And it's going to take a long time. We can either have a hard decade or a bad century. But it's going to be one or the other. And do you hear Obama saying that? Do you hear people, people want a plan 9, in my view, that's at the scale of the problem. They don't see that from the president, certainly don't see it from the Republicans. That is fair. Everyone's going to contribute. And that is aspirational. It has a big vision of rebuilding and reviving America, not just balancing the budget. Because we have big things that we can do to help the world. So I think one reason that the Republicans have been able to mug him in plain sight is that he hasn't actually told people, here is what I've got to offer.
Vision.
Here's something big. That's my take.
Well, Tom, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And That Used to Be Us is now in the bookstores.
It sure is.
And Tom, thank you very much for visiting us.
Great. It was a real pleasure. Thanks, Tom.